Somerville, South Carolina was known for its charm and calm, an old town where life moved slowly. Neighbors knew each other by name, and mornings often began with the distant sound of church bells. But on this particular morning, serenity shattered. At exactly 6:17 a.m. without warning, the ground beneath Somerville trembled violently. Buildings cracked, homes crumbled, and chaos swept through the town like a tidal wave. Within minutes, rescue sirens echoed across the streets. Dust filled the air, mixing with cries for help. Among the first responders was Ethan Carter, a seasoned, dedicated rescue officer, known for his calm under pressure. By his side, as always, was his loyal partner, Rex, a highly trained German shepherd specialized in search and rescue missions. Together they had faced countless emergencies, but this earthquake was unlike anything Somerville had ever seen. Throughout the day and into the night, Ethan, Rex and their team worked tirelessly, navigating collapsed structures, pulling survivors from the wreckage. Each life saved was a small victory against the devastation. By early dawn, most of the search had slowed. The town was quiet once again, but not in peace. It was the silence of exhaustion, loss, and destruction. As the last of the emergency teams prepared to leave, believing they had done all they could, neither Ethan nor Rex realized that their most critical mission of the day was still waiting, hidden beneath one final pile of debris, unnoticed by everyone except Rex. The first light of morning cast a pale glow over Somerville's battered streets. Rescue crews were wrapping up their faces, drawn from fatigue, their eyes dulled by the grim toll of the earthquake. The general consensus was clear. Every building had been searched, every call for help answered. Ethan Carter stood near his truck, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. Beside him, Rex sat obediently, though his ears remained perked eyes, scanning the debris-strewn landscape. Like everyone else, Ethan thought they were done, ready to return, regroup, and mourn the losses. But suddenly Rex stood up. At first it seemed like nothing, just a slight shift, a twitch in the dog's posture. But then Rex's body tensed, his nose lifted to the air. Without hesitation, he darted toward a pile of rubble nearby, one they had already combed through hours earlier. "Rex, what is it, boy?" Ethan called, heart rate quickening. Rex began circling a collapsed section of concrete and brick, barking sharply paws, digging frantically at the debris. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by an urgent intensity Ethan had rarely seen. The German shepherd's eyes flicked back at Ethan, filled with something more than instinct, something closer to desperation. Other team members glanced over, shaking their heads, believing there was nothing left to find. But Ethan knew Rex too well. He recognized that look, the same look that had saved lives before. Without wasting another second, Ethan grabbed his gloves, crouched beside Rex, and began to move aside. Broken slabs of concrete dust billowed in the air as the dog's bark echoed through the silent morning. Deep down, Ethan had no idea what they'd find, but one thing was certain. Rex had sensed something everyone else had missed. Piece by piece, Ethan and Rex worked through the rubble. The air grew heavier, filled with dust and tension. Despite hours of exhaustion weighing on his shoulders, Ethan's hands moved faster. Driven by the urgency in Rex's behavior, the dog stayed low, nose close to the debris, barking intermittently before pausing ears, flicking forward as if listening intently. Then a sound, faint, almost imperceptible. Ain froze. He leaned closer, straining to hear beyond the shifting stones and distant sirens. It wasn't clear at first, but there it was, a soft, labored gasp. "Hold on," Ethan murmured, his voice low but determined. With renewed focus, he carefully removed the last few bricks, finally revealing a narrow gap beneath the collapsed structure. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and that's when he saw them, a young woman cradling something tightly against her chest, her body limp, her face pale and streaked with dirt, but her arms remained protectively locked around the small bundle. "Ma'am," Ethan called gently, reaching in. No response. Peering closer, Ethan's breath caught. Nestled in her arms was a tiny baby boy, no more than 6 months old. The child's face was smudged with dust, lips tinged blue, his breathing shallow and fragile. The mother's grip was firm, almost unnaturally still, as though instinct alone had held her son close, despite the chaos. Ethan's heart clenched. "Hey, stay with me! You're safe now!" He quickly signaled his team. They arrived within moments, stabilizing the debris. Ethan carefully slid into the space, lifting the baby. First, feeling how frighteningly light the child was. Lucas, as they later learned his name, wasn't crying, he was barely breathing. Rex hovered nearby, whining softly, eyes locked on the child. The woman stirred faintly, her cracked lips, parting as if to speak, but no sound came. Ethan noticed the blood on her side, the unnatural angle of her arm. She was injured badly, losing strength fast. "Hang on, we got you," Ethan whispered, motioning for a stretcher. As his team worked swiftly, Ethan felt a strange pull. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, but there was no time to dwell. Right now, 2 fragile lives depended on him, and Rex never left their side. The ambulance sped through the shattered streets of Somerville, sirens slicing through the early morning stillness. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the air thick with urgency. Lucas, the baby boy, lay in a small carrier, an oxygen mask gently fitted over his tiny face. His chest rose and fell shallowly, his skin pale, his body frighteningly limp. Beside him, his mother Sophie barely clung to consciousness. Monitors beeped steadily, an IV drip running as paramedics worked to stabilize her bleeding and fractures. Her face was ghostly streaked with grime and blood, but she still instinctively turned her head toward her child, even in unconsciousness. At the back of the ambulance, Rex refused to sit still. No one had tried to stop him from climbing in. Ethan wouldn't have allowed it. Rex jumped in without hesitation, immediately planting himself between Sophie and Lucas as if he belonged nowhere else. His eyes darted anxiously from the baby's fragile frame to Sophie's pale face, ears twitching with every beep of the monitors. Each shallow breath made him lean closer, as though he could steady their lives by sheer force of will. Ethan sat on the bench, his elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly. His eyes never left Lucas. Every shallow breath the child took felt like a small victory, but also a countdown, reminding Ethan how fragile time was slipping through their fingers. Every few moments, Rex nudged closer to Lucas's carrier, gently sniffing the air, letting out the faintest whine. It was as though he understood just how precarious this child's life hung in the balance. Ethan reached out, placing a firm hand on Rex's back, steadying both of them. "We're not losing them," Ethan murmured, his voice low, almost a vow. As the hospital's glowing entrance came into view, Rex stood tail low but determined. He wasn't going anywhere, not until he knew they were safe. The ambulance doors burst open as they reached Somerville General Hospital. Nurses and doctors rushed forward quickly, wheeling Sophie and little Lucas into the emergency ward. Orders were barked, monitors, prepped IV bags hung, all a blur of movement as the trauma team sprang into action. Rex tried to follow. He pushed forward, but hospital staff instinctively hesitated, unsure if they should allow the large, dirt-covered German shepherd inside. But one glance from Ethan, a subtle nod, and they knew Rex wasn't just any dog. The emergency room doors swung shut, leaving Ethan and Rex outside in the sterile, too-quiet hallway. Rex immediately sat facing the doors, ears forward, muscles tense, unmoving, except for the occasional twitch of his tail. His dark eyes never left the entrance, waiting alert to every sound. Ethan paced nearby, his boots echoing against the cold tiles. Every few steps he'd glance at Rex, drawn to the same silent vigil. Neither spoke nor moved much, but a shared understanding hung between them, a fierce, silent determination not to let go. Inside the battle for Sophie and Lucas's lives unfolded, doctors inserted lines, set up transfusions, adjusted oxygen levels. Lucas's tiny body struggled, his breathing erratic, heart rate dangerously low. A nurse worked frantically to stabilize him, her hands trembling slightly. Sophie's condition was no less dire. She had lost a significant amount of blood, multiple fractures to her ribs and arm, and showed signs of internal injuries. Every second felt like it slipped between life and death. Outside, Rex stood up suddenly, ears flattening back. He paced once, then sat again, eyes locked on the door as though trying to will it open. Ethan noticed, crouched beside him, gently running a hand down his back. "She's strong, Rex," he whispered. "That little guy too, we're going to see them through." Hours crawled by, every minute dragging heavier than the last. Nurses moved in and out, but their faces remained unreadable. Ethan never left Rex, never left. Occasionally someone would glance at the dog lying so quietly, so still, but with an intensity in his posture that spoke volumes. Once, when a nurse walked past too quickly, Rex lifted his head sharply, eyes tracking every movement, as if ensuring no harm would come near them. Anyone could see. Rex wasn't just waiting. He was protecting, watching over them, just as he had from the start. Finally, as the doors swung open once more, Ethan and Rex stood at attention, holding their breath. The fight wasn't over, but there was still hope. The next few days passed in quiet, tense waiting. Sophie remained in the intensive care unit, her body slowly responding to the treatments. Multiple surgeries stabilized her broken ribs and arm, while transfusions corrected her blood loss, but she remained weak, slipping in and out of consciousness. Little Lucas, though fragile, showed the first signs of strength sooner than expected. His tiny chest rose a bit steadier, each day color returning to his cheeks. Nurses commented on how remarkable it was, how resilient the baby seemed, almost like something or someone was anchoring him to life. That someone, in part, was Rex. From the moment they were admitted, Rex never left the hospital. Ethan arranged special permission. There was no argument strong enough to separate them. Every day, Rex positioned himself either by Lucas's crib or just outside Sophie's room, his gaze unwavering, his presence constant. Visitors and staff alike began to notice. Some smiled, others whispered softly, marveling at how the large shepherd seemed almost human in his devotion. Whenever Lucas stirred, Rex perked up his tail, giving a faint wag, before settling back, eyes gentle and watchful. Ethan, too, was always near. He spent hours sitting quietly by Sophie's bedside, wiping sweat from her brow, reading softly when she stirred. Sometimes he'd cradle Lucas, gently rocking him as the baby fought to regain strength. Every time Lucas opened his eyes, they'd lock on to Rex first, as though reassured by the dog's steady, calming presence. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, Sophie's fingers twitched, her eyes fluttered open weakly. Disoriented at first, her gaze slowly found Ethan, then shifted to Rex, lying faithfully nearby. For a moment she seemed unsure whether it was real. Ethan leaned in, offering her a quiet smile. "You're safe now," he murmured. "Both of you." Rex stood, taking a cautious step forward, ears perked, eyes filled with something almost tender. Sophie's lips parted as if to speak, but she didn't need to. Her eyes glistened, and in that shared silence she understood Rex had been there the entire time, watching over her and her son like a guardian angel. Word of Sophie and Lucas's miraculous rescue quickly spread through Somerville. In a town where everyone knew one another, news like this didn't stay quiet for long. But it wasn't just the fact that they'd been pulled from the rubble. It was the story of Rex, the loyal shepherd, who refused to give up, and the rescue officer who never left their side. Neighbors, friends, even strangers, began stopping by the hospital. Some brought baby clothes, others brought food, or offered to cover medical bills. A local baker delivered fresh meals daily. A retired nurse donated essentials for Sophie's recovery. It was as though the entire community, shaken by the disaster, had found a glimmer of hope through the survival of this little family. But through it all, Ethan Carter never left. He took shifts at the station only when necessary, but spent every free moment at the hospital. He was there for every update, every check-in, every moment Sophie stirred or Lucas whimpered. His presence was quiet, never demanding, just steady, reliable, always near. Rex mirrored his dedication. The dog shadowed Ethan but kept his main focus on Sophie and Lucas. Whenever Lucas cried, Rex would rise, instantly tail, wagging gently as if offering reassurance. Nurses smiled at the sight, an unlikely guardian standing watch over the most vulnerable Sophie. Though still recovering, felt it deeply. There was something healing about their constant, silent presence. Something safe. And though no words were spoken yet about what might come next, the unspoken bond growing between them all felt undeniable. Weeks passed, and the signs of healing were undeniable. Sophie regained her strength steadily, her wounds mending her spirit. Returning, little Lucas, once frail and unresponsive, now giggled softly, his tiny hands reaching out eagerly, especially when Rex wandered close by. Throughout it all, Ethan remained a quiet, steadfast presence. He never once treated Sophie or Lucas like a burden, never seemed to be fulfilling a duty, his every gesture bringing meals, adjusting. Sophie's pillow cradling, Lucas was done with a genuine care that went beyond responsibility. Rex stayed as loyal as ever, rarely leaving Lucas's side, often curling protectively near his crib. To the hospital staff it became clear this was no temporary bond. This little family, brought together by disaster, was slowly becoming whole. One bright afternoon, as Sophie sat up for the first time without assistance, she caught Ethan standing by the window. Rex resting at his feet, she watched as Ethan laughed softly, reaching down to scratch behind Rex's ears, and something shifted in her heart. She realized in that moment that the kindness Ethan had shown wasn't fleeting. It wasn't just gratitude or sympathy, it was something much deeper, something she felt mirrored within herself. When Ethan finally turned, their eyes met. No grand words were exchanged, none were needed. Later that month, after Sophie and Lucas were discharged, Ethan stood beside them outside the hospital, Rex at his side with the town gathering in quiet support. Sophie took Ethan's hand. They didn't speak of what had happened. Instead, Sophie gently squeezed Ethan's hand, her eyes shimmering with unspoken gratitude and something deeper. They spoke of the future, a life built on loyalty, kindness, and the unwavering bond forged not just by tragedy, but by the quiet, steadfast love that had grown between them. In the aftermath of destruction amidst broken streets and shattered homes, something unexpected blossomed in Somerville. A family pieced together not by blood but by loyalty and love. It wasn't just about the rescue. It wasn't only about survival. It was about the unwavering bond of a dog who refused to give up and a man whose quiet strength carried them all forward. Rex, with his fierce devotion, stood as the thread that tied them together, a guardian who saw past rubble and ruin to something worth saving for Ethan, Sophie, and little Lucas. The earthquake marked not just an ending, but a beginning. Proof that sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the darkest moments, and that love, whether from a loyal dog or a steadfast heart, has the power to heal, protect, and change lives forever.